Welcome to episode 1 of The Teacher's Lift, a brand new podcast. The Teacher's Lift is a collaborative production created by teachers at the University of Hong Kong, the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and the Polytechnic University of Hong Kong. This podcast has been created as a friendly sharing space for teachers to talk about their practice. Right now, we're focused on e-learning. In this episode, our hosts, Phil and Aditi, have had an opportunity to talk to Tanya Kempston. All of them are from the University of Hong Kong. It's a fascinating conversation about student engagement. Now I'll leave you to listen to Phil and Aditi talking to Tanya.
You want to start that off, Aditi? I'll just bounce off you.
So we are back on our Teacher's Lift podcast, and our guest today is Tanya Kempston, who is from the Faculty of Education at the University of Hong Kong. She has given a lot of talks on language education, technology in education, and she is at present teaching teachers on pedagogy, and particularly a postgraduate diploma in education students. So we have a lot of questions to her about Zoom and other technologies online. Phil?
Yeah, those of you at Hong Kong, you will know this name because it's been talked about. Talking about these issues over the past few weeks has been a very good blog that was on our CETL website, and obviously a presentation quite recently on this topic. So I think nobody better to take us through to using Zoom than Tanya. So welcome, Tanya.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Aditi. Lovely to be here. Thank you.
Tanya, so much has happened in the last few months, and I think most of us didn't envisage things unfolding this way because of the virus and because of the protests. And suddenly now we are all teaching online. Did you think this would happen?
No, well, absolutely not, because I think whenever we started off last September, despite all the protests, it really had this sense of being a year where things were going to, however it would evolve, that things would carry on pretty much as we'd been going for the last number of years. So no, absolutely, I didn't know that any of this was ahead at all. And for me, I suppose I feel in a bit more of a routine now when it comes to online teaching, because I've been doing it since last November. With my PGD pedagogy group.
Oh, wow.
And, I think they're the loveliest group. They've had me doing this 3 times a week with them since last November. So I've had the chance to sort of see what I feel works with them, try out different things. They're very nice and easygoing. So try out things like harvesting chat and moving it to other sessions. Things like also, getting them to do more, take more ownership for and responsibility of the entire session. So
when you say harvesting chats and moving it to other sessions, what exactly do you mean?
Okay, well, that's something that I think you really need to get students' permission for. But on our Zoom call, we're all used to that chat stream on one side, aren't we? And I think it's one of the most useful things about Zoom. And even if I weren't teaching on Zoom, I would want something like this in the classroom anyway. A channel that allows everybody to contribute and ask questions and give an opinion, and something that you can, in a sense, ask for more contributions, or if they are off talking in a breakout room, you can reply to things. So I just think it's one of those incredibly useful multimodal features of Zoom. So that thing about chat harvesting, I asked students permission from my major methods group, and we agreed that, chat, like all talk in the classroom. It's something that needs to be respectful and focused and have a purpose. So we were looking at one of the 9 generic skills in the English language curriculum, and creativity is one of those. So everybody did a brief burst of creative writing that they popped onto the chat. That was writing a letter, which is one of the very common DSE examination text types, writing a letter to the person who'd marked their DSE maths paper. So I teach the English grads. So anyway, we saved that, and then that was able to slot in quite nicely into a later session when we were looking at writing and process writing. So chat is an incredibly useful function.
I think it's really interesting to hear the chat thing. I'm very interested, Tanya, in how you set that up with the students. So how much before you start any activities are you telling students, this is what I want you to be able to do in the chat room, this is the, you know, some rules for use? To what extent are you doing that, or do you sort of let it all be, you just arise out of the interactions that are taking place? Okay,
well, you can't predict, like a physical face-to-face classroom, Phil, you can't predict everything that's going to happen. But really, I think just as in a face-to-face environment, and as I try and train my teachers, you try and contract at the beginning, you try and set up the rules of engagement so that everybody knows there are certain standards expected, that, you know, being online and Zoom is not an excuse to goof off or for everybody to have their phone up, sort of like, you know, sending sneaky texts, etc. So I think you can do that very briefly in, you know, that section of the class at the beginning, class business, and you can say it, and because they're usually latecomers, you can articulate it via chat as well, so that it's just made plain to everybody that how we treat each other in an online environment is, you know, how we would treat each other if we were face to face. So, you know, not everything can be predicted on chat, but if I think there's something very useful, I will say to that person, would you mind if we incorporate that into a future session, thanks? Because, you know, it's a bit of a shame. Chat's a resource. It's a shame to leave it where it is. If it's something that can create threads of connection between one session and another, and, you know, helps to make the course more coherent in a sense.
So what are some of these standards that you have set? Just some examples.
Okay, well, you'll see that on chat, it's like, it's talking because it's chat, right? Except in typed form. So if we're going to use chat, let's think about who we're chatting to and why we're chatting to people, but let's be civil and polite to people while also being honest the way that we are when we're face to face. And same, because of course this is a private message function. So, you know, private message function is also something to be used respectfully, really. I would also say that, you know, these things can just be communicated quite economically, really, at the beginning. I always have a 5-minute class business section at the beginning of every session where, you know, maybe we just need a reminder of certain things, as in, I'd like everybody to contribute to chat as well as talking to each other in English in the breakout rooms and so forth. So I think it's really like what I try to impress upon my PGDE pedagogy students is ask for what you want, be clear in what you want, and if you're asking for certain specific things, you're more likely to get them if those are clearly articulated, rather than you going, well, actually, I think everybody should be contributing to chat about 3/4 of the way through the session, you know?
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so apart from the, you know, using the chat function, what other features or elements of an online session do you think are most important that you've really given some thought to how you might use?
Okay. You know, for me, it's been quite humbling, really. So I've had to revisit basic principles of lesson planning, Phil. So what Harmer talks about, learnability, linkage, and variety, those three very key things are things that I've had to think really hard about. So in terms of learnability, that means setting objectives. But in terms of the Zoom function, that means, you know, that you have students in breakout rooms a fair number of times during the session, okay, but not all the time. I'm also quite happy to, I sort of pop into the breakout rooms quite often without any announcement, so that you know, students know that I'm still there even though I'm not physically able to hover over their shoulder. So in terms of patterns of interaction, I think we can still do a lot that we do in face-to-face mode. So I might start with a little bit of a plenary, some teacher-led input where I'll refer back to the PowerPoint slides if it's a synchronous session and share those and say, okay, your questions, your comments, let's get those going by chat. And I like to use the little protocol I'm showing you now. So for example, if it's if I'm responding to something that Patrick said, I'll do @Patrick so that I can see, I can also see, and the students can see who's responding to whom as we go along, and it's not just what did you say about 20 minutes ago and to whom. So we might have some activities like that. Now everything's mediated by a screen, so you're all held at a distance from one another, but that doesn't stop us from doing activities. So for example, I teach a Tuesday night PGD elective, it's on drama, Wednesday night Common Core is drama. So we're getting students still to do things like still image on their webcam, so you can do that in a little way. You can do vocal exercises still. So I think with Zoom in general, the point is for you not to say, we can't do this, we can't do that, but to say, what can we do? What actually can we do? And then let's work on that. Now, I'm giving a really bad example because I'm just sort of monologuing at the minute, but I think that quite quickly you can tell, even on webcam, that students are sort of just listening and maybe not responding. So now I find it very useful to have a couple of people and appoint them as timekeepers and say, if I am talking for more than the set amount of time that I've allocated for this in the plan, your job is to wave at me on chat and say time, so that I don't get carried away with the sound of my own voice and keep this going forever. That's sort of thing.
A really nice idea, yeah, getting the students involved with that. I mean, you talked about the plan there. Can I just ask something a bit more about that? I mean, how important is this plan to you? I mean, I imagine a lot of people doing this aren't telling the students what their plan is, but you're advocating actually showing the students the plan.
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, it's a kind of portmanteau document because it's got, you know, the Zoom arrangements on it. The idea is that everything's there. It's the go-to for them before the lesson and for all of us during the lesson, so that in a sense we can all see where we're up to. So it'll have objectives on it, and then each stage is outlined so that they'll see what I'll be wanting them to do during each stage. So yes, absolutely. I share that in advance so that they can see that there will be variety, that this will be purposeful, that they'll be expected to do things. So I only have 14 in my major methods pedagogy group. So sometimes I will, you know, individuals will have responsibilities and topics and focus questions. But if you've got a big group, you maybe can't do that. So instead, you know, I will just group them and say, breakout room 1 will do this, breakout room 2 will do that. So at least when it's on the plan, hopefully if it's in sight, then it's maybe starting to be in in the mind as well. So yeah, absolutely. I can't control how many people look at this in advance, but after every single lesson, I will say the plan for next week will be going up. So please make sure you look at it in advance.
You just put it on Moodle, you email it, or you put it up on the chat?
I put it up on Moodle, so along with the materials for that week, so that hopefully there'll be a little bit of toggling about from the plan to the materials in advance.
For our audiences who are not familiar with what is PGDE, we just like to tell them that PGDE is the postgraduate diploma in education. So you're basically teaching students who want to be educators. And now you're using Zoom as a tool, and you're demonstrating to them also how they can use Zoom. So you're not just teaching them content, but they're also learning indirectly how they can use Zoom if this situation was to arise again.
Hopefully, yes. And, at the very beginning, I think it was a little bit comical, Aditi, because, I didn't know Zoom at all. I was filling out the functionality of it. So for the first time, I was kind of like, oh, we're all on webcam. I can see you, you can see me. What happens now? Yes. So the first time it really was a lecture, because I was like, well, I have to say something to them.
Yes.
So the first time wasn't that great.
It's pushed us beyond our comfort zone. And this is one of the best things I like about it, because otherwise we might not be trying all these new things that we are now. And this is what I want to ask you, that in what ways do you think that this has pushed us to think of education beyond what we have been doing? Because lesson plans we've always had. We've always had interaction. And we're trying to do the same thing online. So how do you think it has changed the nature of education?
I think it's a great big unplanned experiment and rapid upskilling for all of us in using this new medium. But, I think for me, it's a great reminder that you can always do more than you think you can, and not to underestimate other people's capacity for response and creativity. So with my PGDE class, I had them do a little bit of micro teaching. So we were micro teaching countable and uncountable nouns on webcam using whatever they had in their fridge at home. And, it really is taking teaching back to its bare bones whenever all the normal classroom furniture is removed. When you maybe have a sheet of A4 paper, some colored markers, and a bunch of bananas, and you're teaching a bunch of bananas. So I would say that, Zoom requires a lot of maturity and generosity, because things like turn taking become very important, don't they? But also, we shouldn't think of it as a one-way medium. It's really not. And I think I realized quite quickly that I need to get students to take ownership and responsibility in the session. Otherwise, it's just another lecture, really.
So you talked a bit about the teacher role there. So how are you finding it with the students? Do you feel they're growing into this role, that they maybe were reluctant to begin with, but are now opening up a bit more? I mean, how are you finding the students' progression in using Zoom?
I think at the beginning, things like getting into a chat room was a little bit, of a struggle, because not everybody knew how to do that. But again, it's feeling out the functionality of the tool. And I have to say, thank God Zoom is quite user-friendly and idiot-proof, because if it was more complicated than it is, I wouldn't really want to use it, to be honest. But it's very intuitive, because, things at the bottom, like the share button says share in a big, green icon, etc. So it's pretty user-friendly, I think, really.
So for language teaching, other than Zoom, have you used any other tools or even strategies that have helped you?
Well, I tried Skype, and I think I realized quite quickly that it's still handy, but in terms of functionality and for a number of reasons, it's got a less intuitive feel than Zoom.
Right.
And I think you can just do that little bit more on Zoom, to be honest.
That's true. Yeah, I feel the same.
Yeah.
So how is language teaching then different from any other subject? I mean, it's language is all about talking and practicing. So is education. These are things which require you to perform. How is it, let's say, different from mathematics? So, and what are the specialized skills that we need to bring into our online teaching as language teachers or teachers who are teaching other teachers to teach language?
Well, I think we have to remember that, that interaction is at the heart of teaching, really, and curtailing ourselves and our own talking so that students have the chance to interact, but also to try things out. For my students, that means maybe trying things out in regard to, micro teaching for their peers, or doing a mini presentation or a nano presentation, that they get the chance to exercise their creativity as well as their language skills. So I think in a session there needs to be a lot of space carved out for students to actually do things that then other people are responding to. And by other people, I mean the other students as well as the teacher. So I really think in terms of language learning or training students to be teachers of language, Zoom is very, very functional. And, my ideal scenario would be a kind of Star Trek type holodeck where everybody just put on their glasses, and it would be fantastic for creating a scenario. But we don't have that yet. Okay, but this is not a bad intermediate step. Now, to be sure, I guess for those clinical faculties, it must be really challenging, because you can't, people don't have test tubes and Bunsen burners and all the rest of it at home, do they? So I guess for them it will be much more of maybe a burst of information from the teacher with Q&A and discussion from the students, but for me there can still be practical demonstrations of things from the teacher and from the students.
Yes. So you have taught drama. I mean, I was looking at your bio, and you've taught drama to students. So how to do that online? Does it work?
Well, now, Aditi, if you don't mind me saying so, you're somebody who has a naturally dramatic face.
Very too, yeah, a bit too dramatic.
That's easy to tell on the podcast.
Too dramatic.
I'm emphasizing now that Aditi has a very dramatic face for our podcast listeners. So if you have the function of the webcam, so if we think of what's at the heart of drama, a voice, a body, and a story to tell. Okay. So one thing that we got students to do a few weeks ago in Common Core was to practice facial expressions. So we typed up emotions and put emoticons on the chat, and everybody did a still image of anger at the same time. So it's quite interesting to see what you think your angry face is, as well as what other people's angry faces are. So then you can do a quick screen capture of that, again with students' prior agreement. And obviously you can't go posting it everywhere outside of the Moodle environment, but just as a kind of visual aid memoir, that's fine. There is so much in drama that's communicated in the face, with the face, by the face, using facial expressions, this area between the eyebrows and the lips particularly. So assuming that students aren't wearing masks, there is still a lot of communication that can be done with that. And also with the voice. So we've had students doing vocal exercises, tongue twisters, reading lines of dialogue, all sorts of things. And I think I've learned now that, some things you think, oh, I'm not sure if that's going to work, but try it anyway. Just try it anyway, rather than opting for the safe option. just try it and see if it works out. It needs to be quite short. All these activities, practical things, are necessarily quite short. But that's fine, because we want, again, one of Harmer's 3 key things. We want variety in the session. That's important.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the time on some of these things. I mean, a lot of what I hear from colleagues is that doing this on Zoom is very tiring and time consuming. I mean, would you suggest making the Zoom sessions shorter than you would if you were meeting face to face, or do you think you can have things at the same length? I mean, what would you say there about the amount of time some of these things take?
Well, I have to say that my sessions are pretty much via Zoom and in synchronous mode. They are pretty much the same length that they are face-to-face in real life. So that means that I just have to have a lot more variety packed in there, and there's a very steady flow in terms of the sequence of what we're doing. So that doesn't mean teacher talks, do breakout rooms. Teacher talks, again, do more breakout room. There need to be other things to kind of not just inject variety, but make this into more of a coherent whole, really. So also, I know that I have read some issues. There was something in the South China Morning Post the other day about students saying that it's quite dull to be on Zoom. So I guess that this is why I'm trying to inject as much variety as possible. But also, I don't want us to come to April and then students perhaps to think, okay, so we've had compressed Zoom sessions. Does that mean we're going to have huge catch-up sessions? Because I'm not sure how feasible that actually is for the sheer amount of classes that everybody has all across the university. Where would we book the rooms, etc.? So I think I've made it clear that class is class, whether it's online or IRL. And whenever it's online, then I expect them to be there, to be present, to be participating, and to really make the most of it for that whole duration.
Yeah, so perhaps we should be framing this rather than in time, in terms of variety, as you mentioned, other aspects.
Yes. So instead of going, oh, it's Zoom, it's not as good, go, it's Zoom. So this is what we're doing. Okay.
Yeah, there are teachers who just use PowerPoint or annotated PowerPoints and think that that would be sufficient for students. But listening to you talk, I can see that you're using so many modalities. You're using voice, you're using expressions, you're using still images, you're using, dramatic mediums and things like that, probably videos. So how would you impress upon teachers the importance of multimodality and how we can use all aspects of what the medium can offer us, so that we can make it as close as possible to a face-to-face interaction?
Okay, so I think that maybe it's useful to have exemplars.
I see.
It's also very useful to ask students what they think works, because they have ideas. I mean, many people have a very vigorously lived social media life, don't they? So therefore, I would say ask them what they're thinking. And you can do that during the session very quickly by logging onto your Mentimeter account and asking for a quick word cloud. So I'm glad that some of them do find positive aspects in this. Now, clearly, they feel that it's not exactly perfect. And that's true as well. There are things, there is the fizz, the fun, the spontaneity in face-to-face that you don't get when things are mediated through a screen. So I understand that it's okay to say Zoom is fine, but, and there is that but, isn't there? Because there's something about people being in a room together, and there's a slight unpredictability with it. It's a really very genuine experience. This is much more at a remove, really, okay? But I'm so glad, as well as very relieved, that the majority of them seem to find it interesting, which is the bigger word there. So,
Would you mind?
you know, there are things that need to be worked on. And I'm not sure that we can accommodate everybody's wishes, except by going back entirely to face-to-face mode, which hopefully will be in April. But I think there is still quite enough that students can get out of this for it to be useful.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, just looking at some of those words,
Yeah.
I mean, the bigger ones are more common responses, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
The word cloud with bigger words, and to see interesting, inspiring, incredibly engaging, interactive, as a lot of the words, they're obviously alongside sad it's over Zoom and Zoom is fine, but
yeah,
it's quite interesting to see that a number of students there seem to really see the potential of something that's online to still be engaging and interactive.
I think that, you know, I also remind them that when I looked at this was interesting, and something that I was able to just bring up in the email that I sent to them, to say that the next plan was on, to say that, you know, I realize that it is a slightly restricted mode, and there is that sense of it's okay mostly, but because we feel it too. It's not just this is something we're doing to students. We also, in, you know, our sense of ourselves as teachers teaching a class, there is that sense of this being not just very different, but the same restrictions that apply to students, I think, also apply to us. And I think I've learned to be much clearer in my talk, to be more distinct. Things like impromptu jokes don't really work as well, because it's quite dispiriting, actually, whenever you make a joke you think is funny, and then there's this deathly silence for 10 seconds over Zoom, and then somebody goes, oh, that was a joke. So, you know, in terms of your own discourse, I think I've learned to try and be a little bit more polished.
Tumbleweed is the same no matter what the modality, right?
Some things don't change.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, like clearly, I mean, you have found very inspiring and very engaging ways for students to do this, and this is quite visible from the comments you have received. So it is up to the teacher, isn't it, to create this relaxed environment where students can feel comfortable to emote, to engage, to talk, to respond to each other.
It is up to the teacher. I think, as in every class, we set the tone, but it's also very important for students to realize that they have responsibilities. So, you know, some responsibilities I will assign directly, things like asking some students, and, you know, you can ask, if you have a big class, maybe ask 5 people to be chat provocateurs, so that if chat goes a little bit silent for a while, then they can you know, pose a question to others in the class. So at Phil, at Aditi, what do you think of X, Y, and Z? So I think it's good to give a number of people the role of chat provocateurs and rotate that around week by week. So it's not just the same people going, I'm a chat provocateur again, but also, you know, if it's the same group of people, the same year group, generally they're in touch with each other via WhatsApp as well. So various things can happen. People can kind of fall off their Wi-Fi, etc. So also asking a couple of people to be the you know, the baton, hold out the baton. So if somebody kind of falls off due to Wi-Fi going a bit, bandwidth going crazy, because most of our students are doing this at home, and there might be their little brother in the other room who's got homework to do, etc. So hold out the baton so that that person can get back onto the call, rather than going, oh, what did I miss, whenever they come back onto the Zoom call. generally. Some classes I do it myself, but other classes I ask somebody to be the sweeper at the end. And the sweeper is somebody, you know, at the end of a class, somebody comes in and sweeps up the room, tidies it up. So that part of tidy up is saving the chat and then sending it to me, and then I can post it onto Moodle.
Oh.
So there are many things that, you know, roles and responsibilities that students can do and have.
Yes. Just before we go, so in the, you know, since you started doing this in November, please, would you like to tell us about any incident, any moment where you felt that things just clicked and they worked so wonderfully, and you felt a sense of elation as a teacher?
Sure. Well, I had been wondering about doing micro teaching via webcam, and I thought maybe I'll just tell them about micro teaching and give a little example of me micro teaching with my whiteboard, and this is how you do it. And then I thought, no, because that's just more of me talking and talking. So I put it in the plan. So you're going to micro teach countable and uncountable nouns to all of us, and the rest of the group will be your students. So please behave as if you are the teacher. And I was so nervous. I thought, is this going to work? Will it just be really artificial? And it worked just fine. It worked just fine. So same really with things like a still image of students holding a pose to demonstrate a particular moment that happened in the class novel when we were looking at how to use the class novel. Same with facial expressions related to Brecht's idea of the theatre a few weeks ago. I think every time I've got a little bit bolder about pushing the boundaries in terms of interaction and what I'd like students to try doing.
And just one follow-up, and you said, you know, to try things. But what if it doesn't work? What is your advice if things don't work? How should we react? What should we do?
Well, I suppose that things sometimes don't work on Zoom, but also in face-to-face mode. I think we've probably all had that moment in the classroom where you go, oh, I don't think I'd do that again. That didn't really work. And I think it's okay to be honest and to simply say on the chat and maybe in person, you know, guys, I felt that didn't really work so well whenever we did ABC. What do you think? If we were doing that again, what do you suggest? How might we modify that to make it a better activity for you? Can you give me some suggestions via chat? So rather than letting an embarrassed silence linger over the whole session, I think it's okay to acknowledge these things and say, you know, I'm also getting better at this. I'm also learning how to do this better, and to be a receiver of feedback from students on what they thought worked well and what maybe didn't work so well.
Thank you so much, Tanya. That was so insightful, and I think I learned a lot.
Yeah, there's so many takeaway points from that, I think, Tanya. I mean, your passion comes out very clearly, but I think there's just so many things in terms of what the multimodal environment can bring, what you've talked about with chat and posting images. I think it's been very, very useful. I'm sure other teachers would find this very useful as well. So I really want to thank you for your time, Tanya. It's been great to talk to you.
Great to talk to you too. Thank you for the chance. I really enjoyed it. And, you know, I guess I would just say that I think Zoom is not about the technology. Zoom is about the interaction. And in all teaching and learning, I think that's really what matters.
Well said. Thank you, Tanya.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thanks a lot, Tanya.